with our focus being to improve the health and stewardship of our local watersheds. So a couple of housekeeping things. My slide will go here. So this presentation, there we go. This presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Partners of Scott County Watersheds YouTube page shortly after, so right around a week, excuse me, after this presentation. That way, if you want to go back and reference anything, or if maybe you'd like to share it with someone who couldn't make it, you can go ahead and do that. If you have any questions throughout, please enter them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. But if you have any questions about maybe not being able to see an image or hear audio, please enter that in the chat function and send that to ATech, the webinar facilitator. That's going to be our technical guru for today. So once again, questions about the topic into Q&A, questions about technology into the chat box. And of course, have to share some of our other exciting upcoming events. So just 2 weeks from today, we have our Fall Snapshot, which is a volunteer water quality monitoring day. And that's going to be held at Bettendorf, but it's actually throughout the whole county. So on that day, anyone who's interested can learn how to conduct water quality tests and how to collect the data. And then you actually get to go out and do that through several sites throughout the county. And then we use that data to help improve the health of our watersheds. So it's an exciting day for both the volunteers and for us. We also have a bunch of cleanups coming up with the CEC, which is part of the Mississippi Rivers Towns Initiatives Project, the EPA project. There's a bunch of groups there, but there's going to be a bunch of trash cleanups with a big event hosted out of the Freight House Farmers Market on October 15th. So keep a lookout for that. And of course, we couldn't do any of these things like the cleanups, the forums, or our snapshots without our partners. So I'm going to take a moment and thank all the people, especially those who are representing these agencies and our participants today. So thank you again for supporting us and supporting healthy watersheds. And one last plug, you can be part of that too. So we have lots of different ways for people to get involved, whether it's through membership or through different funding levels. But if you want to learn more, you can see that on our website. And lastly, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today and then turn it over to her. So hold up here. So Kristine Nemec manages the Iowa Roadside Management Program at the University of Northern Iowa Tallgrass Prairie Center, supporting Iowa's county roadside vegetation programs and conducting research. Previously, she worked as a restoration ecologist for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Nebraska and as a research entomologist with the USDA Agricultural Research Service in South Dakota. She received a BS in Environmental Studies and her master's in biology from the University of Nebraska at Omaha and a PhD from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in Natural Resource Sciences. So lots of great accolades for you there, Kristine. I'm excited to hear your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. I'd like to begin by giving a history of the Iowa Roadside program in Iowa. So back in the 1920s, this is what Iowa rural roads could typically look like. They weren't really developed. They're extremely muddy, hard to navigate. It wasn't uncommon for vehicles to get stuck. Just an adventure trying to get from one place to another. In the 1930s, Iowa began investing in paving, or at least adding dirt, developing the rural roads so they're easier to navigate. And of course, when you're adding those roads, you're developing a shoulder, those shoulders need to be revegetated. So they're not just a muddy mess themselves with no vegetation with a steep slope. In the 1920s through 1960s, the state or county roadside departments typically planted those steep roadsides with tall fescue or smooth brome. This was just the go-to seeding method. Both of those established pretty well. They're relatively cheap, so they had those advantages. But in the 1960s, nationally, there was more of an interest in beautifying the highways. First Lady Lady Bird Johnson was instrumental in this. In 1965, the Highway Beautification Act was passed. So a big focus of this was not only trying to reduce the number of ads and garbage in roadsides, but also the idea of making them more beautiful by planting wildflowers. And a large part of this was actually incorporating native wildflowers. So the thinking was that this would boost the morale of the American public, just make America a nicer place to live in, to travel in, if the roadsides had varied, attractive vegetation to look at as people were traveling. In Iowa, of course, we also fell under the Beautification Act since it was a federal act, but there's also growing interest in adding more prairie back to Iowa. Iowa used to be about 85% prairie before European settlement and conversion largely to ag land or urban areas. Less than 0.1% of Iowa's prairie remains. So that was trying to grab people's attention. Wow, we've lost so much of this natural resource. How can we start to get some of the benefits of prairie back? And two of the early leaders in Iowa was Daryl Smith, University of Northern Iowa. He was a biology professor for about 48 to 50 years or so, just a really long time. He retired several years ago. He's a professor emeritus. He still is fairly involved with giving prairie talks or involved with the prairie community. And Paul Christensen at Cornell College, he was another influential person. Both of them started to do more research. Well, how can you best add prairie back to the landscape? What kind of methods can you use? Where do you get the seed? So the 1960s and 70s were, I guess they're really important as far as research for revegetating prairie in general, but also roadsides. Both of them were interested in roadsides as a potential place to put prairie. And the public also started to become more concerned about the lack of prairie or about how roadsides were managed. In the 1980s, this was largely driven by concerns about water quality. The Water Quality Act was passed in Iowa in the late 1980s. And the public noticed that the DOT and secondary roads or county roads departments tended to just blanket spray weeds. They would just go along and just spray anything that was in the roadsides, whether it was native or weeds, just spraying everything that was there, which was counterproductive because if you kill everything, well, that just creates more bare ground for weeds to come back in. A lot of people don't realize there are actually some nice native remnants in roadsides. Not all of it was planted to fescue and brome. There are patches that are nice, high quality prairie. And so there was concern about that. Why are we destroying some little nice bits of prairie? Why are we using so many herbicides in the landscape? I was reading about the history of an event in Johnson County called Prairie Preview. And according to that, they actually used to spray Agent Orange in the roadsides in Johnson County in the 70s and 80s. And I did a little bit of research into this, and I guess Canada also used to do this. So it may have been fairly common, at least across Canada, parts of the US, to use Agent Orange as an herbicide in roadsides, at least in these two locations. So I thought that was interesting. The late 1980s, the Iowa legislature passed legislation creating the Integrated Roadside Vegetation Management Program. And what that long word means is basically that it's declared to be in the general public interest, welfare of Iowa, and a highway purpose for the vegetation of Iowa's roadsides to be preserved, planted, and maintained to be safe, visually interesting, ecologically integrated, and useful for many purposes. So it's a really forward-thinking, holistic, ecological approach to managing part of the landscape, roadsides. No other state in the country has something like this that I'm aware of as far as at the county level. Around the same time, they also passed the Living Roadway Trust Fund legislation, where they set aside money that comes from these three sources. The Living Roadway Trust Fund is used to allocate money among state, county, and cities who are managing roadsides in this integrated ecological manner. I'll mention how this kind of got off the ground at the county level. Bill Haywood was a Black Hawk County roadside manager. So Black Hawk County is where Cedar Falls and Waterloo are. He was with the Conservation Board, and Daryl Smith at UNI collaborated with their department to try to get this idea of planting prairie plants in the roadsides. So Bill Haywood he's this really charismatic person. He traveled around the state, generated interest, and it was instrumental in getting other counties to hire a roadside manager whose main job is to manage the roadside vegetation, to plant the prairie plants, and to maintain them. And just as a fun fact, Bill Haywood was actually a little bit more interested in forests. So he left to do a consulting business and plant many trees across Iowa. I read one estimate, he's planted around 2 million trees across Iowa. So trees are desirable in some places, not really prairie, because prairie doesn't have trees. And he's also an artist who creates furniture and other pieces out of wood. So you can actually see him at some of the art markets in Iowa. So I thought that was kind of a fun fact. But he was really important in the early years of the roadside program in Iowa. If you want further information on the history of Iowa roads and roadsides, the Iowa DOT has a nice video called Out of the Mud, which is around 23 minutes. That includes some of that fun footage from the 1920s of what the roads were look like. Extremely muddy, and it just talks about the development of roads and roadside vegetation in Iowa. And it's just a 23-minute video. So it's on Iowa DOT's YouTube channel, if you want to watch that. And it's also, I think I have a link to it on my channel. So the Iowa Roadside Management Program has a YouTube channel. We have some public service announcements from the 1990s, just really brief. An introduction to Iowa's roadsides, the benefits of having a roadside program that's about 18 minutes. That's also from the 1990s, I believe. So we have some historical videos as far as the length of this program, and also some more recent videos. We have about 3 or 4 recent videos. One that was just created a couple of years ago that has an interview with the roadside manager from Jones County, Wes Gibbs, and his engineer. And they talk about how beneficial they find having a roadside vegetation program. So if you're interested in short videos about Iowa roadside management, it's all on our YouTube channel. I'd also like to share how important roadsides are in terms of the amount of public land in Iowa. That large green slice represents the share of public land that roadsides represent. So this is the state, city, and county roadsides make up 60% of public land in Iowa. People don't realize it is public land. It's managed by the county or the state. It's not supposed to be managed by the adjacent landowner, which is what tends to happen, but the state and county is responsible for it. The Iowa DNR, Iowa County Conservation, and federal public lands make up the rest of the public land use in Iowa. And this map shows Iowa gravel roads. It shows the tremendous amount of area that is covered by roads. So it's a big land use and important to manage it well if you're concerned about the environmental impacts of how roads are managed. So I'll talk a little bit more about the support Iowa has. We have a Living Roadway Trust Fund coordinator at the Iowa DOT, which is Tara Van Was on the far right. She's responsible for administering those LRTF grants. So counties have to have a plan on file with the DOT if they want to apply for those grants. She maintains a technical advisory committee that meets and helps to review grant applications and keep up to date on what's going on with Iowa roadside management. She creates and implements the requirements for the plans that the counties have to have on file. And She helps create public outreach materials such as posters and publications. So they're typically contracted out. So you can see on that display table, they have these nice large posters about butterflies or beneficial insect use of roadsides. They have little pamphlets on how to identify trees. On the Living Roadway Trust Fund website, they have information about how to get these materials. And I also have some of these materials they can ship to people. The legislation also created my position. So my position has been around since the late 80s, early 90s. I've been in it myself about 7.5 years. So my role is responsible for administering a federal highway grant to provide seed to the counties, organize an annual fall conference and a winter meeting for the county roadside managers. They're scattered all across the state. They're the only position in their county. It's kind of a unique position. So they really like to come together, network, learn from each other, maintain a monthly e-newsletter and social media, again, to help keep them connected, recruit new counties. It is voluntary at the county level that you have this. About 47 to 50 counties either have a plan or a roadside manager. They help orient the new roadside managers, and I also help with public outreach. So this kind of summarizes the resources available: seed, grants for equipment or roadside inventories. And I work at the Tallgrass Prairie Center. My position has always been housed at the center. I think because Daryl Smith at UNI was instrumental in the development of all of this. And he's also instrumental in the development of the Tallgrass Prairie Center. So my position's always been here and at Cedar Falls as opposed to the DOT. Some people ask about that. Well, why aren't you at the DOT? Well, because of the history, UNI was so instrumental in providing the expertise about how you plant prairie, how you can do this in the challenging environment of roadsides. And this is just an image of some of the folks at the center, and also our summer help. We have a staff of 7, but in the summer we grow because of summer help. So I'll mention some of the activities that a typical roadside manager does. One of these that has the biggest impact on water quality is spot spraying. So as opposed to that blanket spraying of just driving along, spraying everything in the roadside, if there's a patch of weeds, a good roadside manager prioritizes just sprays the most problematic species. By law, the county has to manage noxious weeds. So that's a legal requirement. Noxious weeds have been designated as something so problematic that if they're not controlled, they can cause economic, ecological damage. So there's a net benefit to the environment of controlling these so they don't overtake the desirable vegetation. So you can see they have these precision sprayers where they just target those. So that really reduces the amount of herbicides in the environment. They can't do their job without doing any herbicide use, again, because that legal requirement to control the weeds that cause all these problems, but at least they can just target and prioritize. So that's definitely a big benefit. Mowing, similar to spraying, a good program tries to be strategic about mowing, not mowing all the time, like all the vegetation has to be kept short. Legally, they have to keep the clear zone adjacent to the road. Usually it's about 8 feet. That clear zone has to be kept mowed short, obviously for safety reasons. The number one priority is always safety, but the amount of the roadside farther away from the road doesn't have to be mowed as often. And that helps reduce fuel use. It's a safety benefit for the county personnel who have to get out there and mow those steep roadside slopes. So less mowing to an extent can be beneficial. Prescribed burns. About half of the counties that have a program do prescribe burns if they have the personnel who are trained in it. So that can keep the prairie vegetation healthy. It helps control shrubs, because shrubs or trees, of course, present a safety hazard if a driver leaves the roadway. They don't want to run into that. So that's another big benefit of burns, is that it can really be proactive in preventing shrubs and trees from coming in. Brush control in the winter, that's often a common roadside manager activity. That's the best time of year to control brush and apply herbicide to the stumps so it doesn't grow back. And some roadside managers also clear snow if they work in the secondary roads department. That's another one of their jobs. So it's another way they add value to the county. Seeding is another activity. They might use a drill, they might use a hydro seeder, because on the steep slopes, it might be too dangerous to use a drill, so they have to spray it onto the slope. I'll talk about the seed that I provide to the counties. I do get a federal grant. The center has been getting that since 1998. Lately, it's been the amount of 420 to 430,000 worth of seed, just because the price of seed has gone up. The demand for pollinator-friendly species has gone up, especially driven by the conservation reserve program that landowners use. So we have to increase our grant amount to be able to afford enough seed. So I provide two types of mixes. One's called a clean out mix. That's because some of the projects are called clean outs when they go in and they have to clean out or dredge the silt that's come in. Some of the roadsides are next to farmland that has a lot of erosion. So during a lot of rain, that soil might come off the land. It might start plugging the ditches up. So the county department has to go and spend county money on excavating all that soil out. So of course, there's a chance that might have to happen again if the land has a lot of erosion. Well, in a few years, another period of a heavy rain, well, it might silt in again, so they might have to go in and clean it out. But at least there's a benefit of having that seed out there for a while. But we don't spend quite as much money on that if there's a chance it might have to get cleaned out again. There's also the diversity mix for roadsides that are near more stable sites that don't have a lot of erosion. But both of them have a fairly large amount of wildflower species. So they tend to have about 20 to about 40 wildflower species, as well as grass and sedge species. And this is really high quality seed. When I put it out for bid, I specify a preference for yellow tag seed. So yellow tag seed originates from Iowa prairies. It's been gathered from prairie remnants that have never been plowed. So this maintains the genetic heritage, the genetic integrity of our prairie plants. They've been adapted to prairie conditions in Iowa. I have a counterpart, a coworker at UNI, the plant materials program manager, and this is her job, is to go out, collect seed from prairie remnants, grow it out on our land. The center has around 63 acres of land behind our building on the UNI campus. So she manages that. And then she provides that seed, it's called foundation seed, to commercial growers in Iowa that then grow it out and sell it. So the center does not sell seed to anyone, but we do grow out this foundation seed, the seed from original prairie remnants, and provide it to the commercial growers. So those commercial growers in turn bid on my seed purchase. That's another reason the center was founded, is to provide a source of seed for roadsides. And there's also some other markets who might buy the yellow tag, but the roadside programs, the county roadside programs, and the state DOT are huge purchasers of this seed, this type of seed. This just goes on to explain the formula I use. I don't allow grasses and forbs that were grown with neonicotinoid insecticides. I can't buy those, or cultivated that have been grown through the commercial or traditional horticultural industry for beauty and that sort of thing. We just want the genetic integrity, plants that are really well adapted. They haven't been cultivated or grown for aesthetic purposes solely. We use different seeding rates depending on how steep the slope is to make sure we have good coverage. The seed mixes always include the big four prairie grasses, so big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, and switchgrass, as well as a few other grasses like Canada wild rye, Cytotes grama, western wheatgrass. So these are really key for that erosion control because they have such dense root systems. But we also want to help benefit pollinators. So we include nectar plants that grow all the way from early spring to fall. So there should be something continuously out there for them to feed on. This map shows the level of county involvement with native roadside vegetation. The counties in green have a roadside vegetation manager on staff. That person, again, whose main responsibility is to manage the roadsides in an ecological way. The number represents how many years the county has requested the free federal seed mixes since 1998. And the little check mark in the bottom indicates if they have a plan on file. So typically, if they have a plan, they hire a roadside manager to implement it. But a few counties might have the plan, but they either haven't hired the roadside manager yet, or maybe someone else in the department is implementing it. But typically they want someone that's their sole job. And they like having someone in the county they can point everything to. Like if the engineer can say, oh, this is the person on staff who handles that. If a resident has a complaint or a question, well, this person knows all about the roadside vegetation, go to them. So if the county doesn't have a roadside manager, the default contact is the engineer. So all those counties in white, typically the county engineer is who all the residents will need to go to if they have any questions about how the roadside vegetation is being managed. Some of the benefits of managing roadsides in this way, one is the better erosion control on steep slopes. This is kind of a classic image that many folks in the environmental field have probably seen by now, but it just shows at least an artist's rendition of the differences in the root systems compared to something like Kentucky bluegrass on the far left. So those dense root systems are really good with erosion control on those steep roadside slopes. The thicker root systems tend to be better at competing with weed species. It doesn't mean there's no weeds. Weeds might still come into a prairie planting, but there tends to be less weeds than if there's just fescue or brome, because the prairie plants can outcompete them better. Now, if the planting isn't managed very well, over time, it can still be overtaken by weeds. But if it is managed well, it's mowed at the proper timing, because there's some mowing, if there's no prescribed burns, can help the planting as long as it's not over mowed. But that's one benefit, is better competition with weeds. Reduce snow glare, snow drifting. That's another benefit. That's a safety benefit to drivers. Increased driver awareness. Some studies have shown that the more plant diversity on roadsides helps drivers remain alert and aware, which it makes intuitive sense. If you're just driving along, there's just one kind of plant, well, it's not very interesting, but if there's cool variety of textures and colors, it might help drivers be a little bit more aware. And of course, in the summer, especially when everything's in bloom, it provides attractive roadsides. And also habitat, ground nesting birds like pheasants, native ground nesting birds might use the roadsides. Skippers, other types of butterflies like the monarch, native bees. In a landscape where there's not a lot of native vegetation, roadsides can provide a net benefit. So studies have shown that generally less than 10% of the local population is impacted by being killed by the car. And of course, on roadsides with less traffic, like rural roads, the benefit can be even greater because there's less traffic. Now, there hasn't been much study on the effects of roadside vegetation on water infiltration or runoff. This image is from the Prairie Strips team at Iowa State, where they've studied the impacts of placing around 30-ish feet wide strips of prairie directly within cropland. So that's kind of similar to some of the roadside widths. It depends on, sometimes it's 10 to 20, sometimes as much as 30 feet, depending on the roadside. So it's another type of strip of prairie vegetation, is these prairie strips that Iowa State plants. So you can see on the left, if you have 100% crops, this is how much silt water tends to run off a field. Even if you just take 10% out and put it in those prairie strips, well, you can see a visual difference there. And if there's 100% prairie, wow, you get a lot of benefit. So this is the closest thing I can provide, because there's just not a lot of research on this, on water movement, water quality on roadsides, although Keith Schilling with the University of Iowa is very interested in this. He has been doing some studies on the impacts of roadside vegetation, and he'd like to do more specifically on these roadside programs that have these native plantings. So I would like to collaborate with him on doing more to do that. This is the Scott County Roadside Manager, Brian Burkholder, on the right, with Leland Searles, a prairie consultant, on the left. Another benefit of having this type of program, this IRVM program, is you can get grants from the Living Roadway Trust Fund to do a roadside vegetation inventory. So with that grant, you can hire a botanist to come out, survey the roadsides, and give you a picture of the problem areas in the county that have a lot of noxious weeds or invasives, and also the really high quality areas that actually do have a lot of nice native plant diversity already there. And that's huge, because then the county roadside manager can really prioritize their efforts, try to protect those nice remnants. So this is really important for a newer county program, is to get one of these inventories done. And the neat thing about Scott County is they collaborated with the GIS department to create a map that's available to the public online, the Scott County IRVM roadside inventory. So if you're a resident, you can just click on the inventory, see what they found in your county, what's near you. I think this is great that they've created this really nice publicly available map that you can see the results from this inventory. And I also would like to mention that you do have a really good roadside manager. Brian Burkholder has been in his position since 2017. So that's when Scott County started their program, was 2017, but already it's a really strong program. The public can sign up to have roadsides by their property planted. The Adopt a Prairie program is what he call it. And I understand he has over 60 landowners that have signed up for this Adopt a Prairie program. So I think it's really neat. Not every county has the capacity to respond to resident requests to actually have it planted. Usually it's just all about, well, here's where the engineers are doing the work. This is where we're going to plant it. But a few counties do have this program where residents can specifically request that the prairie be planted in a certain spot. So that's really neat. Another benefit I provide, this is open to anyone, whether a county has a program or not. Every year I organize a roadside conference. We typically rotate it around the state because the county roadside managers like to visit their counterparts, see what they're doing in their county. These are pictures from last year's conference, which was in Kalmar and Decorah. This year we had it in Okoboji a few weeks ago. And next year, 2023, it's going to be October 4th through 6th. It's a Wednesday through Friday in Cedar Falls. So the public's welcome to join this. It usually costs $95 registration fee for the whole conference, includes meals, a field trip, Thursday afternoon, or just $35 for one day. So if you're interested in something like this, you can always email me to be on the mailing list. You can follow us on Facebook to hear about announcements. There's talks about different kind of environmental topics. A lot pertains to roadside vegetation. We also just like to learn about environmental issues in general in the area where it's being hosted. Like we learned about Iowa's Great Lakes and efforts to protect water quality in Iowa's Great Lakes when we were in Okoboji a few weeks ago. So that was a fun talk too. Here's my contact information if you want any more information, any more detailed information after this talk. I can, of course, answer your questions. We have a Facebook page. We have an Instagram account and a YouTube channel. So if you like social media, those are various ways you can follow what we're doing, what the roadside managers are doing. We try to share if the roadside manager is doing something interesting. Brian just collaborated with the local high school, I believe, to plant some native plants. That was within the last week or two. So that's one of our most recent Facebook posts. I thought that was pretty neat. He's really good about getting out in the community and collaborating on different kinds of native plant projects or being that native plant resource. So with that, I can answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Kristine. I would definitely echo Brian Burkholder. We've worked with him in a couple different ways, and he's great at all the things he mentioned. It's awesome. I have seen a couple questions come in. So I think one was answered during your presentation, but how can we see what counties are part of your program? You shared that map. Is that map publicly available online anywhere?
It's on my website. I'm not sure if it's the most up-to-date one. You can always email it to you if you want the most up-to-date one. The university is supposed to be revamping our website pretty soon, so some of the stuff's not quite up to date. We're waiting for that revamp, but if you want any of this information, I can certainly email it to you, including that map.
I know I found the map. Interesting. Another question. I have CRP that is jeopardized by brome. I understand that brome is still widely used by the Iowa DOT for roadside plantings, and that deer, birds, etc., are likely bringing in the brome into from other fields and other prairie projects. How can we get the Iowa DOT to stop using brome?
Well, you can email. If you reach out to me, I can give you the email address of Nathan Pullen, who deals with their seeding. Brome and fescue, they do still have a role in some parts of the roadside, because not the entire roadside is appropriate for natives, like near intersections, or if there's equipment or infrastructure in the roadside. So I don't know that if any of the DOTs or county departments will entirely get away from brome, because there's just some areas where you need to plant it. But if you have questions about that, I could give you the contact information for Nathan about when or why it's used. Yeah. Now, I should also mention, when I said our website, I don't think I listed it here, but the website is tallgrassprairiecenter.org. Or of course, if you Google it, you'll come across it. And if you go to tallgrassprairiecenter.org, you'll see there's a tab for the roadside information. You can click through that if you want more information.
Super, thank you. We'll give folks a couple more minutes to throw in their questions. But I have a question. Just want to know, you said you've been in this position for a while. What's been your favorite part of it?
My favorite part, I guess I'm just really inspired by the county roadside managers. I always come away energized whenever they get together at the roadside conference, especially because it's a bit longer event, or the firm meeting. Roadsides are a challenging place to plant in. There's compacted soil, it's steep, it's really visible. I mean, maybe some areas you work in aren't so visible, so you have to deal with the good and the bad about the public commenting on what the roadsides look like. So it's challenging, but it's a really neat group of people who are just really mentally tough. They're passionate about what they're doing, passionate enough to withstand public criticism or compliments, and their situations are different too. Some counties are more accepting of this type of management than others. So I would just have to say that's my favorite part, is just the individuals who choose to be in these types of positions are pretty neat. And plus the rest of the environmental community is just that I work more with the roadside managers. I think that's my favorite part.
Awesome. I always find that a lot of people in the conservation world answer something like that. It's a good group of people to be around. I have another question here. You mentioned that this kind of program doesn't really exist in other states. Is there anything even remotely similar to it that you know of?
There are other DOTs who do this. Texas, for example, I know they've tried to plant more natives along their roadsides. Florida, I believe North Carolina, Illinois is trying to try to reduce their mowing. Minnesota, Nebraska. And these are all states that do care about the vegetation. They're trying to get more natives out there. It is expensive too, though. That's another reason I don't see the roadsides ever getting all the way away from fescues and brome, because it's expensive. You can only do a certain section at a time. There's time to management. If you want it to look out, if you want it to look good over the long term, you need to manage it properly. But at least there are DOTs that are growing more and more aware of this. They're trying to do the right thing. There's a group called the Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group that was formed in 2015. That's around the time that the interest in pollinators really took off with the federal executive orders about protecting pollinators. So this Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group, they have a lot of DOTs, utility companies that belong to it. They're all interested in how do we get more native vegetation in the landscape. So that's really exciting that's really taken off and grown. I think there's a lot of interest in doing the right thing. The practicalities of it, the money, that's harder to come by, but there's a lot of people in these organizations that do want to use more natives.
Excellent. So would you say that the biggest barrier then to counties implementing these kind of programs at all, or expanding them, is cost?
I think cost is one barrier, and also just political will. The Board of Supervisors in the county is really key to determining if a county has a program. Some landowners are just really opposed to milkweed. They're really opposed to native plants. It's just weeds right by my property. Why are you doing this? And the Board of Supervisors, some of them are landowners themselves who might feel this way, or they might not feel that way, but if there's that political pressure against these really vocal landowners, that can also keep a program from even getting started, or for them even looking at the budget. How can we make this work? It's because of the political pressure not to have natives in the roadside.
Well, I think that's a kind of good segue and to my last question here. I think it'll be our last for the forum today. That's what can people, our participants today, the layperson, do to kind of help further these roadside programs, or further just the efforts to put natives on roadsides?
Well, if your county has a program, and again, I can provide the map if you're not sure, but of course, Scott County does have a really good program. It never hurts to just send a thank you note to each member of the Board of Supervisors, or the roadside manager themselves, or the roadside manager supervisor, which in Scott County is the engineer. Usually the roadside manager supervisor engineer, sometimes it's the conservation board director, or sometimes it's the Board of Supervisors themselves. But just sending thank you notes, I think if you have a program, is great. Or asking the roadside managers, or if there's anything I can do. Do you have a list? Some counties have advisory committees where residents can be on the advisory committee, and that they participate in meetings throughout the year to learn what's going on. So that might be an option. So yeah, I'd say thank you notes, contact your roadside managers, or anything I can do to help support your program. If you don't have a roadside manager, if you don't have a program, well, then you can contact your Board of Supervisors and express your interest in having one. Ideally, if you can gather other residents, try to get it on the agenda of the meeting, one of those Board of Supervisors meeting. If you gather, the more people there, the better. Have someone come to speak to the Board of Supervisors. That can be maybe an engineer or roadside manager from a nearby county, if they have the time and they're willing to come speak. That can be really important. This is how it benefits us. I can come speak, or one of my counterparts at the DOT from the Living Rotary Trust Fund. So somehow getting on the agenda of Board of Supervisors, finding the appropriate person who can speak to them, finding residents who support this, trying to all show up at a meeting and talk. Like, is this something that the county's interested in? Sometimes they're not, and that's fine, but it's always worth a try. At least, hey, look, let's have a conversation if this will work for our county.
Awesome. Well, so that's all the questions I have, and I don't see any more coming in. But again, you can contact Kristine here through her contact information listed, or you can reach out to me and I can be the messenger there, the middle person. Thank you all for participating, and thank you, Kristine, again for speaking today and sharing all this really great information. I know I'll be looking deeper into some of this stuff afterwards, so really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak.
All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day.